So I'm just looking at a combo valve off a John Deere tractor loader backhoe. So this is like our 310SG that we've got, that's the later serial number, that has the lift and tilt functions and stabilizer functions built into one monoblock valve here. So we got not a valve stack, but one valve. So they've done that again. It's the serial number break on the 310G and 310SG. Where they used to have a separate stabilizer valve, as we saw in our spaghetti drawing, and then lift and tilt was its own directional control valve. But so they've combined it into this, and they call it the combo valve. So we've got the tilt, the lift, and then the left and right stabilizers. You notice the stabilizer work ports are pretty small because the hoses to the stabilizers are pretty small. And again, all mechanical spools. There's no option on the on the 310 for pilot operated hydraulics on the front of the machine or the stabilizers. For the backhoe valve, there is a pilot operated option that our the college's 310SG has, the one we're looking at in these labs. The other 310SG the college has does not have pilot operated hydraulics on the back. The backhoe valve is all manually operated as well. But regardless, both machines have manual controls on the front. And the reason I'm coming to this valve, we can see the main relief here for lift, tilt, and for stabilizer functions. And we've got some port reliefs, and it looks like anti-cavitation valve here. But on the tilt function, I just want to talk about this stem coming off the side of the spool valve. That's part of the mechanical anti-spill back function that is part of the 310SG. We'll just go look at the linkage in the cam on the machine that connect to this, because that's a little unique to see some kind of a peg coming off the side of a directional control valve spool like that. And just before I go, we'll look here at same valve, but this one's got front mounted auxiliary, so it's got an extra control valve function in it. It's got tilt, lift, and an auxiliary, and then the two stabilizer functions. But this is the one that's on our machine. So what's happening here on the tilt function, a lot of TLBs will have some kind of linkage like this, and this is connected to the tilt linkage for the front bucket. And as you roll the bucket back, obviously with this movement of this linkage and the tilt cylinder, this linkage is going to move, and it runs up alongside the loader frame here, and it comes to this sort of archaic looking cam. It's got this piece of steel, looks like 3/8 plate, cut with this shape. It's got a pin through it, and it's got an adjustment here. We've got a lock nut, a couple of lock nuts, and then a hex on here where we can turn this adjustment to lengthen or shorten this bar to this clevis on the end. So it's adjustable. And then there's also something welded on here, kind of an arm, and that's lined up roughly with a black stripe that's painted on the loader frame. So referencing where the loader is to where the bucket is, as the bucket rolls back and forth, it's going to move this arm. And as this arm moves, it's going to show the operator basically when that piece of steel is lined up with the black stripe. If this is adjusted properly, that's going to show the operator that the cutting edge in the base of the bucket is flat on the ground. So it saves the operator getting out of the cab to go check that. They've got a visual here to see that the bucket is level or flat. Now, if you change the bucket, or you change the cutting edge, or something gets bent here or something, well, then there is some adjustments. If you put a different bucket on, you're going to have to come back and set this again to keep the operator happy. Now, that peg we looked at on the valve has to do with this arm. So there's an arm here, and if you watch the lever in the cab, pull that arm, I'm pulling the tilt lever. So that cam, when the bucket rolls back, what's going to happen is it's going to move that linkage, and there's linkage that runs down through here underneath the cab and comes around to the tilt function, and what that's going to do is impede the movement of the tilt lever towards the dump the rack back position. So I'm just up in the cab here, and you can see the operator's got that reference for knowing when the cutting edge of the bucket is flat or the bottom of the bucket is flat on the ground. Now, when we curl the bucket back, I'm going to move the lever on this axis to curl the bucket back. And I'm able to do that with the bucket on the ground. The problem here, though, if I get the loader frame coming up and up and up and up and the bucket's up in the air and I tilt back the bucket, I could spill material out of the bucket onto the hood of the machine and onto the cab, and I have a potentially unsafe condition there. So we'll have a look at how that cam that I just showed pushes on that stem here and moves the linkage, and will actually prevent me from curling the bucket back once the loader frame is up a certain height. So as I bring the loader up, I can curl the bucket, but if I try and keep curling it, because the loader frame's coming up, I notice it's kind of fighting me. And not only is it fighting me, it's now pushing my hand to the dump position. So the bucket's actually dumping because my hand is being forced over this way. I can't bring the loader, the lever over to the curl back position anymore. So if I want to spill material on the cab, I can't physically lock that spool. I can still dump it. It'll let me move that way, but if I try and curl it back, I'm going to get to a certain point, and then the linkage there is going to stop me. So if you watch that cam, when I dump the bucket, that cam moves away from that pin. If I roll the bucket back, right there, I start to push my hand over. When it hits that linkage, it pushes my hand back to the hold position. And then as I raise the loader frame, you can see that linkage pushing further, and now I'm to the point where I can't curl back at all. So it's basically fighting me. So it's preventing me now from curling the bucket back any further than that. The cutting edge is barely up from level. It's up enough that it would hold the material in the bucket without spilling if I wanted to get over the sideboards of the truck to dump my load. But if I'm going to try and dump it back on myself, I can't. It's physically preventing that. So that's what that cam is about. A lot of TLBs will have that. So that's what's going on there. It allows me to dump, but it won't allow me to roll the bucket back. It will for a while, and then it kind of forces it back. So if you watch this, I'm dumping the bucket. I'll curl the bucket back, and then right there, it's pushing my hand over. So it physically forced that lever back to the hold position. So that's what that pin is all about. Now, let's look at another function. If I've got the bucket dumped, and I would then want to return to a position where I can dig with the front loader, or I want to grade the earth, you know, I can watch that linkage, and I can watch for that black line to line up with the piece of steel that's welded on there. And if I get that, I'm out of alignment a little bit. If I get that lined up to my eye and that linkage is adjusted right, then my cutting edge, it's not actually adjusted right on this machine. My cutting edge is down on a little bit of an angle. Well, the operator may have requested that. So really where I gotta set it is, I want to be right flat. And it's pretty close. So I got that black stripe. There's another more convenient way for the operator though. If they would dump the bucket and they want to return to that flat cutting edge position, we've got a detent with an automatic kick out. So if you watch that, I'll try and get the lever and the black stripe together here. There's an automatic kick out that's happening when the bucket gets to that flat position, and that's electric. So on the control valve underneath on the tilt valve, there is a solenoid, and the solenoid engages the detent. You notice I don't have the detent there. If I start the engine, I've got to dump the bucket first. Just dump the bucket. I'll just turn the key on. I've got a detent. But if I turn the key off, you can see there was a solenoid actually holding that tilt axis. The curl back position detented is depending on an electric solenoid. So there's a solenoid on the end of the control valve spool that turns into an electric magnet when it's powered up. And when the control valve is in this position, the retainer for the centering spring on the control valve comes in contact with that coil, that electromagnet. So it magnetically sticks it. You can pull it out. You can pull it. You're strong enough with the linkage to pull it off of the magnet. The magnet's enough to hold it against the centering spring. And it feels like a detent, but really what's happening is the plate on the end of the centering spring is sticking to that magnet. And once the magnet gets de-energized, well, then the centering spring is going to pop the control valve back to the hold position. So must be something out there that's cutting the power to that magnet when we get the bucket level, because again, that should happen in an automatic position. So curl the bucket back. So what's happening right there to kill the power to that coil that was holding us detented? Something's killing the power, just like when I turn the key off, pops back to hold. Let's go look for it. I'll pause this so I can climb. So I'm just looking at that cam again. On the back side of the cam down in there is a proximity switch. So let's look at that from underneath. Lots of angles here, we're not getting a real good look at it, but underneath there you can see there is a wiring harness here running up to that switch. It's got a loom over it, and that switch is in a nasty area where all the grease and dirt and everything is going to be. But that micro switch is being triggered by another portion of this cam, and when the switch contacts close, or are they opening? Well, that'll be a good question for Mr. Harris. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure the contacts are closing and tripping a relay that cuts the power, but I may have that backwards. I'd have to look at the electrical schematic. But the switching of that micro switch that's on this linkage is through a relay cutting the power to the coil that is on the tilt directional control valve. So that solenoid coil installs here. Whoever changed this valve for whatever reason, probably the new valve didn't come with that solenoid, so they've stolen it off of here. But that solenoid goes in here, and there's the plate on the end of the spring, centering spring, the retainer for it. And that's what's going to stick to that coil when I get to the bucket curl position. So when the bucket's curling back, that linkage is coming in contact with the solenoid that sits here. We'll slide under the machine and have a look at it. So that's the return to dig solenoid. It's on the tilt function that curls the bucket. So tilt is for the bucket curl. And then this pin is what the mechanical linkage is interfering with our anti-spill. So that mechanical cam and that rod going down the side to the bucket linkage at the front of the machine, that's actually what was forcing my hand mechanically. So I'm just back underneath the machine here, and there is the wiring coming from the relay through that connector running to the solenoid. There's a solenoid mounted on the end of the cap for where the centering spring would be for the tilt function, for bucket tilt. So again, when you're curling the bucket, the centering spring assembly in here moves down. If the electromagnet is powered, then it's a magnet, and then it sticks to it mechanically. When you cut the power, the relay shuts the current off to this coil, then the centering springs just kick the control valve lever back into the hold position. So there's a shot of that combo valve again underneath this 310 SG. And up in here, running along the inside of the frame rail, it's hard to get a good look at it on the camera, but that's the linkage that's connected up front to, can I get a shot of it in there? Not really, it kind of disappears in beside the engine. But that is the linkage that connects to that anti-spill. So we got the linkage running here. That's mechanically interfering.